The courtroom smelled of old oak and regret. Chicago's winter light slanted through the tall windows, catching in the dust that floated between two people who once swore to never let go. Owen Martin, 35, CEO of Martin Holdings, sat in a gray suit that cost more than his first car. Yet somehow, he'd never felt smaller. Across the table sat Xialia Nelson. Her skin, warm and deep like polished mahogany, glowed against the cold light. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek knot, her expression composed, but her eyes were oceans in storm. The clerk's voice echoed through the silent room, case number 408B. The dissolution of marriage between Owen Martin and Xialia Nelson. For a brief second, neither moved. The air was thick with all the things they would never say. Then the judge cleared his throat, tapping his pen like a metronome, counting down to heartbreak. Xialia reached for the pen first. Her fingers trembled, the gold wedding band still circling her finger, though the love it represented had long been declared dead. She pressed the pen down, her signature carving itself into paper that would outlive every promise they'd made. The sound, soft final, felt like a body hitting the ground. When she slid the papers across the table, she didn't look at him. Didn't need to. She'd already memorized every inch of that face. The proud jawline, the tired blue eyes, the faint scar near his temple from when they used to ride his father's old Harley down Lakeshore Drive. Back when they believed love was enough to survive the world. Now the world had won. "Your turn, Mr. Martin." The lawyer's voice was sharp, businesslike. Owen picked up the pen. His hand was steady, though every part of him screamed to stop. He could feel his heartbeat pounding against his ribs, matching the ticking clock on the wall. This was what freedom was supposed to feel like. Empty. He signed his name in bold, confident strokes, just as he'd been trained to sign every business deal, every merger, every promise that had nothing to do with love. It was done. The judge gave a polite nod. "You're both free to go." Free? The word hit him like a curse. As he gathered his papers, Owen expected her to bolt from the room, but she didn't. She stood slowly, smoothing her black coat, and turned to him for the first time in months. Her voice was soft, almost tender. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Owen." He wanted to say, "You're what I was looking for." He wanted to say, "I don't know how to stop loving you." But instead, he said nothing. Because saying nothing had always been easier than admitting when he was wrong. She walked out, heels clicking against marble like a ticking clock, counting down the seconds until regret. The door closed behind her, quiet but devastating. Owen sat back down. His lawyer, Mr. Atkins, cleared his throat. "We'll finalize everything with the county clerk in a few weeks. Congratulations, Mr. Martin." Owen almost laughed. Congratulations for what? For losing the only person who ever looked at him and saw more than his bank account. For mistaking ambition for happiness, he stood shoving his hands into his coat pockets and left the courtroom. Outside, Chicago was drowning in sleet, the kind of cold that found its way under your skin. He walked down the courthouse steps, his breath fogging in the gray air, and paused beside the street where black sedans waited. Freedom was supposed to taste like fresh air. It tasted like rust. His phone buzzed. Michael Carter's name flashed on the screen. Owen hesitated, then answered. "It's done." Michael said, voice too upbeat for the gravity of it all. "Yeah, good. About time. She was holding you back, man. You've got expansion plans to push investors waiting. You can't build an empire while you're busy playing house." Owen stared out at the Chicago River, at the way the water sliced through the city like a scar. "Yeah," he murmured, "you're right." But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. He hung up before Michael could say more. His car waited at the curb, a sleek black Tesla, reflecting the gray skyline. Inside, the heat hummed low, but he didn't start the engine right away. He sat there looking at the signed papers in his lap, her name beside his. Together one last time. He ran his thumb over the ink, smudging it slightly. One last mark, one last touch. In another life, he would have chased her down the hallway. He would have told her that he didn't mean it when he said she was in his way. That what scared him wasn't her strength, it was how much he needed her. But this was not that life. He put the papers away, started the car, and pulled into the river of traffic. Chicago blurred around him, gray buildings, streaks of taillights, people hurrying through the slush with coffee cups and cold hands. Somewhere in this city, Xialia was walking away from him for the last time. The thought hollowed him out from the inside. He stopped at a red light. A bus passed by, plastered with an ad that read, "Some endings are new beginnings." He laughed bitterly under his breath. For her, maybe. For him, it felt like drowning. He remembered the first time he met her 7 years ago at an architecture expo downtown. She was wearing a red coat explaining a model of a sustainable housing project. Her voice was calm, intelligent, radiant. He'd stood there pretending to understand the design, but really he'd been studying her smile. He'd told her once, "You make buildings sound like poetry." She'd laughed. "And you make ambition sound like love." How ironic. He'd turned her into another one of his blueprints, something to design, control, complete. But love was never meant to be a project. The light turned green. He didn't move. Cars honked behind him. He didn't care. A gust of wind blew snow across the windshield, blurring everything into white. He thought about going home to the penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan that suddenly felt too big, too empty. But he couldn't bear the silence waiting for him there. He drove aimlessly through the loop, past Millennium Park where the silver bean reflected a distorted version of the world, bent, warped, broken. Kind of like him. Finally, he pulled into a parking lot by the river and sat there listening to the rhythmic tapping of sleet on the glass. He loosened his tie, leaned back, and closed his eyes. All he could see was her face as she said goodbye. All he could hear was her voice saying, "I hope you find what you're looking for." He whispered into the empty car, "You were it, Xialia." But the city didn't answer. Only the low hum of wind through skyscrapers, the sound of trains passing overhead, and the ache in his chest that refused to fade. His phone buzzed again. Michael's text. "Drinks at the Langham. Don't mope. Celebrate your freedom." Freedom. That word again. He started the car. The city lights shimmered against the river like fragments of something once whole. As he pulled onto the bridge, the wind picked up, howling through the steel. A lone thought drifted through his mind, sharp as glass. If she walked through that courtroom door right now and asked me to start over, I would. But she wouldn't. She was too strong for that. Too proud, too tired of waiting for him to become the man he always promised he'd be. He crossed the bridge, his reflection rippling on the black water below. Somewhere behind those clouds, dawn was trying to break through, but he wouldn't see it. Not tonight. Because some men only learn the value of light when they've chosen to live in the dark. And Owen Martin, brilliant, ambitious, powerful, had just chosen wrong. The city swallowed him whole. Snow still covered Chicago when Xialia Nelson moved into her new apartment on South Shore Drive, a faded red brick building that looked like it had been standing there since the days when jazz spilled out of every bar and the lake wind carried laughter instead of sirens. The rent was cheap, the heat unreliable, and the view overlooked the frozen sweep of Lake Michigan. But for Xialia, it was enough. The morning after the divorce, she woke before dawn. For a moment, she forgot. The bed beside her was empty, the room quiet, except for the radiator clicking to life. Then it hit her, like a wave, breaking on stone. She wasn't Mrs. Martin anymore. Just Xialia again. She made coffee the way she always had, 2 sugars, no cream, and drank it standing by the frosted window. Outside, a man in a navy coat walked his dog along the lakefront trail, his breath ghosting in the air. She watched them until they disappeared behind a snowbank. Then she whispered to no one, "You're fine. You're going to be fine." Her voice sounded too steady to be true. The day blurred into gray hours. She unpacked boxes labeled architecture projects and kitchen, stacking her life into neat piles of survival. The walls of the apartment were bare except for a single framed sketch, one she'd drawn years ago, of a sustainable home design, back when she and Owen used to dream of building things that would last. Now, all she built were walls, invisible ones. By afternoon, she found herself scrolling through old photos on her phone. Her thumb hesitated over one Owen and her at the Lakefront Festival of the Arts. He'd been holding a pretzel in one hand, her hand in the other, eyes half squinted from the sun. She almost smiled. Almost. Then she deleted it. The sound of the digital trash tone was quieter than she expected, but louder than she could stand. She put the phone away and focused on work. Xialia had been an architect before marriage, sharp creative, known for her clean lines and sustainable materials. After marrying Owen, she'd quit her job at Marlowe Design Studio to help him manage the early stages of Martin Holdings. At the time, it made sense. He needed someone who believed in him when investors didn't. And she did completely. She'd stayed up nights reviewing his presentations, correcting projections, turning his vision into something investors could see. And it worked. He rose fast and fierce. Deals, partnerships, headlines. Then one day he stopped saying, "we." It became, "I built this. I made this happen. I don't need distractions." That was when she realized she'd been written out of her own story. Now, months later, she sat at her small dining table laptop, open, drafting blueprints for a community housing project. Her clients weren't billion-dollar corporations. They were teachers, nurses, single mothers like herself. People who wanted something beautiful, practical, human. She liked that. Still, every line she drew reminded her of him. Owen had loved clean geometry, designed the impossible, he used to say, leaning over her sketches, the scent of his cologne filling the air. She pushed that thought away and turned on the radio. A soft jazz melody filled the room. Ella Fitzgerald, the song they danced to at their wedding. Her fingers froze on the keyboard. She reached for the dial, but it was too late. The voice had already carried her back to that night, the ballroom glowing with candles. Owen's hand firm on her waist, his whisper at her ear, "If the world ended tomorrow, I'd still find you in the dark." She shut the radio off. The silence afterward was louder than the music. Evening came early in winter. The streetlights flickered on one by one, their glow falling across the snow. Xialia wrapped herself in a blanket and sat by the window. The world outside was still. Somewhere in the city, Owen was probably at a business dinner, shaking hands, making deals, pretending the word love had never been a liability. She wanted to hate him, but hate required energy, and all she had left was quiet exhaustion. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Ms. Nelson, this is Dr. Reeves from Northwestern Hospital. You missed your annual physical." "Oh," she said softly. I forgot. That's okay." We can reschedule. But before you do, have you been feeling all right? Any dizziness, nausea, fatigue? A pause. She hesitated. Just tired, I guess. It's been a long few months. Understandable, the doctor replied kindly. Still come in soon. Let's just make sure stress isn't turning into something else. Thank you, doctor. I will. But she didn't. Not that week. Or the one after. Instead, she kept moving work clients' errands until one night, standing in the bathroom, she felt the sudden, unmistakable flutter low in her abdomen. A pulse that wasn't hers. Her breath caught. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, her skin pale under the fluorescent light, her eyes wide, disbelieving. She reached a trembling hand, down, pressing gently against her stomach. No, she whispered. It can't be. She took a deep breath, then another. Opened the drawer, pulled out an old box, a pregnancy test she'd bought months ago, but never used. Minutes stretched into eternity. The digital display blinked once, twice. Then it appeared. Pregnant. She sank onto the cold tile floor. The sound that came out of her wasn't a sob. It was something deeper, raw. The kind of sound that belonged to someone who'd run out of tears. She stayed there until the test went dark, until the coffee in the kitchen went cold. Then slowly she stood up, washed her face, and whispered, "Okay, okay." Her first thought was Owen. Would he want to know? Would he care? She remembered the way he'd looked at her the last time they'd spoken, eyes hard, voice colder than the lake in February. You're not part of this world anymore, Xialia. You wouldn't understand what it takes. No. She couldn't call him. She placed a hand over her belly. We'll be fine, she whispered. I'll make sure of it. The next morning, she made an appointment with Dr. Reeves. The office smelled like antiseptic and peppermint gum. The nurse smiled as she took her vitals. First time, yes, Xialia said softly. When the ultrasound screen flickered on, the room seemed to hold its breath. A soft, rhythmic sound filled the air like tiny drums. The doctor's voice was warm, almost awed. Congratulations, Ms. Nelson. There are 2 heartbeats. She blinked. 2 twins. The word hit her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Twins. 2 lives. 2 pieces of a love she thought had died. Her throat tightened. She smiled through tears she didn't expect. Hi, she whispered to the grainy shapes on the screen. I guess it's you and me now. For the first time in months, she felt something that wasn't pain. It was purpose. In the weeks that followed, she worked harder than ever. Her days were structured around small victories, eating on time, resting when she could, sketching until her fingers cramped. She bought prenatal vitamins, second-hand baby books, and a used crib from a neighbor. She didn't tell anyone, not even her mother who lived 3 states away. This secret was hers alone, sacred and terrifying. At night, she'd sit by the window with a hand on her stomach, whispering stories to the lives growing inside her. You'll have his eyes, she said softly, and maybe my stubbornness. That'll balance things out. She'd laugh a little, then cry quietly into the silence. Winter began to thaw. The lake cracked open under the first hint of spring. One morning on her walk to the market, she saw a familiar car idling by the curb, a black Tesla window half down. For a second, her heart stopped. Owen. He was talking on the phone, expression, sharp voice clipped. The same focused intensity that used to draw her in now made her stomach twist. He didn't see her, or maybe he did, and pretended not to. She ducked into a nearby coffee shop, hand on her belly, heart racing. Through the window, she watched him drive away, the taillights vanishing into morning fog. For a long time, she just stood there. Then she whispered, "You don't have to know." But deep down, a voice she couldn't silence whispered back, "You can't hide forever." That night, as the city lights shimmered across the lake, she wrote in her journal, something she hadn't done in years. I used to think endings were the worst thing that could happen. But maybe this is just a beginning I never planned for. Maybe love doesn't die, it changes shape. Maybe it's beating inside me now twice over. She closed the notebook, placed it on the table beside her sketches, and turned off the lamp. The room fell into darkness, but she didn't feel afraid. For the first time since losing Owen, she wasn't thinking about what she'd lost. She was thinking about what was coming next. The rain came early that spring, cold and steady, drumming against the glass of the small cafe on Belmont Avenue, where Xialia sat, her hands wrapped around a cup of mint tea she hadn't touched. The ultrasound photo lay folded in her purse, soft from how often she took it out, studied it, whispered to it. 2 tiny shadows, 2 faint heartbeats. Her world had changed, and yet outside Chicago kept rushing by, as if nothing had happened. She pressed a palm to her stomach, still flat beneath her sweater, but alive with quiet promise. You're both here, she thought, and I'll protect you, no matter what. Her phone buzzed a text from her friend Mariah. You've been ghosting everyone. You okay? Xialia stared at the message, hesitated, then typed back. Just busy. Work's been crazy. She hit send and immediately regretted it. The lie tasted bitter. But she wasn't ready. Not to explain. Not to open the floodgates of questions and pity. Outside, the rain thickened, blurring the city into streaks of gray. She watched the reflections of passing headlights ripple through the puddles and thought of Owen. Wondered if he was still driving that black Tesla, still checking his phone every 5 minutes, still chasing deals that would make headlines. She hadn't told him. Not yet. Not ever, maybe. And yet some nights, she caught herself imagining how he'd react. Would he be angry? Shocked? Would his blue eyes soften the way they used to when he looked at her across the breakfast table? Hair messy, smile unguarded. Or would he look at her the way he did in the courtroom? Distant cold, a man who'd already decided love was bad for business. The thought made her chest ache. She drained her tea, packed her things, and left the cafe. The rain hadn't stopped. She lifted her umbrella and hurried toward the bus stop, but halfway there her vision blurred. The world tilted slightly. Her knees wobbled. She reached for the nearest wall and took a deep breath. The dizziness passed as quickly as it came, leaving behind a hollow echo of fear. When the bus arrived, she sank into a seat and pressed her forehead against the cold window. The city rolled by in streaks of light, bookstores, laundromats, a florist's window glowing faintly in the rain. Every face outside looked like someone who had a plan, a direction. Hers was survival. By the time she reached her apartment, the nausea had returned. She barely made it to the bathroom before she vomited. Her body was changing faster than she'd expected. When it was over, she sat on the cold tile floor, trembling, whispering to the small lives growing inside her. It's okay, she said softly. I'm okay. You're okay. But she wasn't sure if she believed it. A week later, she finally went back to see Dr. Reeves. The hospital smelled the same sterile humming with machines and muted footsteps. Xialia sat in the waiting room, eyes fixed on the clock, wondering how she'd gone from designing skyscrapers to counting minutes in a place that felt too bright, too quiet. When her name was called, she followed the nurse into the exam room. Dr. Reeves entered with a reassuring smile. Good to see you again, Ms. Nelson. How are we feeling today? I'm mostly tired, she said honestly. A little dizzy sometimes. He nodded, jotting notes on his clipboard. All normal in the first trimester, especially with twins. Your last tests came back healthy, but you'll need to take it easy. Stress, lack of sleep, and overwork can be dangerous at this stage. She nodded, though she knew rest wasn't a luxury she could afford. Her freelance design projects were the only thing keeping her afloat. As Dr. Reeves adjusted the monitor, the familiar rhythm filled the room again, 2 steady heartbeats. The sound wrapped around her, soft and fierce all at once. "Everything looks strong," he said. "You're doing great." For the first time that week, she smiled. "Thank you." As she left the hospital, she stopped by the front window overlooking Lake Michigan. The lake was restless under gray clouds, waves breaking against the shore. She stood there for a long moment, one hand on her stomach, her reflection overlapping with the water outside. She whispered, "We'll make it through this. I promise." Over the next few months, life settled into an uneasy rhythm. Morning sickness, doctor visits, late-night design revisions, and the quiet loneliness of secrets. She started working remotely with a small architectural firm in Evanston. Less money than before, but flexible enough to let her work from home. The team knew her as Ms. Nelson from Chicago, nothing more. She liked the anonymity. Every Friday, she walked to a nearby farmer's market for fresh fruit and bread. She got to know the vendors, the woman who sold wildflower honey, the retired chef with the best sourdough in the city. They didn't know her story, and she didn't tell them. But their kindness was enough to keep her grounded. Sometimes in those quiet moments between rainstorms and blueprints, she'd find herself thinking about names. If they were girls, she liked the name Ariel, light, graceful. If they were boys, maybe Miles and Noah. Names that sounded strong, safe. She wrote the names in her sketchbook beside building plans and grocery lists, as if seeing them on paper might make them real. One evening, she stayed late at her desk. The city outside was alive again, sirens in the distance, the hum of traffic from Lakeshore Drive. Her computer screen glowed, casting light across the stack of papers and the small plant by the window that refused to die. Her phone buzzed. Mariah again. "Drinks at the Velvet Room tonight. You're coming." Xialia almost replied, "Can't," but paused. It had been months since she'd gone anywhere. Maybe a few hours out would remind her what it felt like to be more than just tired, anxious, and alone. She typed back, "Okay, just for a little while." By the time she arrived, the bar was already packed, dim lights, laughter music vibrating through the walls. She spotted Mariah near the counter, waving. "Girl, you look beautiful," Mariah said, hugging her. "Where have you been hiding?" "Working. You know how it is." Mariah raised a brow. "Working or avoiding?" Xialia smiled faintly. "Both." They ordered mocktails. The night stretched warm and loud around them. But as the band started playing a slow song, Xialia felt her stomach twist, not from nausea this time, but from recognition. The tune. It was their song. The one Owen had played on vinyl the night they moved into their first home. Her chest tightened. She stood abruptly. "I need some air." Outside, the rain had started again, thin and steady. She leaned against the cool brick wall, closing her eyes. "Still can't listen to that one, huh?" Her eyes snapped open. For a second, she thought she was imagining it. But no, he was there. Owen. Standing under a black umbrella suit, damp at the shoulders. Blue eyes sharp and unreadable. Her breath caught. "What are you doing here?" He hesitated, then said, "Business meeting. Upstairs. Didn't know you still came here." "I don't," she replied quickly. "Not really." Silence stretched between them, filled with all the words they weren't saying. He looked at her, something flickering in his expression. Curiosity, maybe even guilt. "You look different." "I am." Her tone was cool, but her hands were shaking. She prayed he wouldn't notice. He nodded, stepping back slightly. "I should let you get back to your night." "Yeah," she whispered. "You should." but as he turned to leave, a sharp pain knifed through her abdomen. She gasped, grabbing the wall for balance. Xialia. His voice was suddenly urgent. What's wrong? She doubled over, breath catching. It's nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Her vision blurred, and the ground tilted beneath her. Owen caught her before she hit the pavement, his arm wrapping around her, panic slicing through his voice. Hey, stay with me. Look at me, Xialia. She tried to speak, but the world had gone gray, sound fading into a dull roar. The last thing she heard was him shouting for help. When she opened her eyes again, everything was white. The ceiling above her buzzed softly. Machines beeped beside her. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach. Your babies are fine, a calm voice said. She turned. Dr. Reeves was standing by the monitor, relief etched across his face. You fainted, he said gently. Low blood pressure. But they're strong. You're lucky someone got you here quickly. She blinked, disoriented. Someone, Dr. Reeves smiled. Tall man, dark suit, said his name was Owen. Her heart stopped. He left a few minutes ago, the doctor continued. Said he'd check back later. The rain outside had stopped, but her pulse thundered in her ears. Owen had seen her. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. She turned her head toward the window. The city lights shimmered against the lake reflections trembling in the glass. For the first time in months, fear and hope twisted together in her chest, like twin threads. Because fate had just opened the door she'd spent months keeping shut. The morning after the collapse felt like waking up from a dream she couldn't escape. The hospital room was bathed in soft amber light filtering through half-closed blinds, painting stripes across the white sheets and the IV line that trailed from her arm. Xialia lay still, one hand resting protectively on her stomach, waiting for the faint flutter beneath her palm that reminded her she wasn't alone. They were still there, both of them. 2 heartbeats, 2 lives. She exhaled shakily. Relief came like warm rain after months of drought. The door creaked open. A nurse stepped in, smiling gently. You're awake, she said, checking the monitors. How are you feeling? Tired, Xialia whispered. But better. Good. The nurse adjusted the IV, then added, Your husband. Sorry, your visitor. He was here all night. He left maybe 20 minutes ago. Her pulse jumped. He stayed. The nurse nodded. Sat right there in that chair. Didn't move. I think he forgot to blink for half of it. She smiled softly, as if it were a romantic detail. Then she left, leaving the scent of antiseptic and sympathy in her wake. Xialia turned her head toward the empty chair. His coat was gone, but a paper cup sat abandoned on the small table beside it, the name Owen, written in black marker, half smeared by rain. She stared at it for a long time. Her heart told her to be grateful. Her mind told her to run. By late afternoon, she was sitting up sipping broth from a small bowl when the door opened again. This time, she didn't look up right away. She didn't need to. She felt him. Hey, Owen said softly, closing the door behind him. His voice had lost that sharp edge she'd come to expect. It was quieter now, almost unsure. You look better. I guess fainting in the street makes people reevaluate their diet, she murmured, without meeting his eyes. He tried to smile, but it faltered. I was just walking out of a meeting when I saw you. You scared the hell out of me. She set the bowl down. You shouldn't have brought me here. His brow furrowed. Shouldn't have. You were unconscious, Xialia. I didn't ask for your help. Yeah. Well, I didn't ask for permission. The room went still. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor filled the space between them. He ran a hand through his hair, the same way he always did when he was frustrated. Look, I'm not here to fight. I just needed to know you were okay. Her voice softened, but only slightly. I am. You weren't last night. She didn't answer. The truth was, she didn't remember much, only his voice, shouting her name, the feel of his arms catching her before the ground, did the scent of his cologne, as everything faded to black. He stepped closer, but she tensed, and he stopped halfway. Dr. Reeves said, "You're expecting," he said carefully, as though the word itself were fragile. She looked up at him, then really looked, his blue eyes weary and searching. She wanted to lie, to tell him it wasn't his, to push him back into the life he'd chosen without her. But the truth was already there between them, undeniable. Yes, she said simply. Owen's throat bobbed as he swallowed. Twins, her fingers tightened on the blanket. Twins. He nodded slowly, exhaling a shaky breath. I don't even know what to say. Then maybe don't say anything. He took a step forward, voice rough. You weren't going to tell me. Her reply came out sharper than she intended. You made it clear I wasn't part of your world anymore. Remember? You said love was a distraction. That I held you back. That was before I knew. Before you knew what? That I was human, that I bleed, break, and still survive. He opened his mouth, closed it again. For once, the man who always had the right words on stage and meetings in front of cameras had none. Xialia looked away, blinking fast. I wasn't trying to punish you, Owen. I just didn't think you'd care. Something broke in his expression then. Don't say that. You didn't, though. Her voice trembled. You walked away without looking back. He took another step forward. I thought I was doing the right thing, that you wanted out just as much as I did. God, Xialia, I was an idiot. The apology hovered there, raw and unsteady. For a moment, she almost reached for it. Almost. But forgiveness wasn't that simple. She pressed a hand to her stomach. I don't want your guilt. I can do this on my own. He hesitated. You shouldn't have to. I already am. The truth hung in the air, heavier than anything he could counter. He rubbed a hand over his face, then dropped it to his side, defeated. If you'll let me, I want to help. I don't know how, but I'll figure it out. She shook her head. Don't make promises you'll regret later. You're good at building things, Owen, just not staying in them. He flinched as if she'd struck him. For a second, neither spoke. The sound of the city seeped faintly through the window, the distant wail of an ambulance, the hum of traffic life moving forward. Finally, he said quietly, I'll be outside if you need me. When the door clicked shut, the silence that followed was almost unbearable. That night, sleep refused to come. The lights dimmed. The monitors blinked steady and still, her mind raced. She replayed every moment of their conversation, every word she'd wished she could take back, every one she wished she'd said sooner. He'd stayed. The nurse was right. He had sat there all night. Why? Out of duty guilt, or something else that scared her to even name. The babies moved a faint flutter, like two small wings beating inside her. She smiled through the ache in her chest. It's okay, she whispered. You've got me. But a quieter voice, somewhere deep and honest, whispered back. And maybe him too. The next morning, the doctor cleared her for discharge. You need rest, Dr. Reeves said firmly. Real rest. And someone to help you. Do you have family nearby? No, she said. Just me. He hesitated. Then call someone you trust. She didn't answer. When she stepped into the hallway, she didn't have to look far. Owen was there, leaning against the wall, still in yesterday's suit tie, loosened eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep. He straightened when he saw her. Hey, I can drive you home. She started to protest, but exhaustion won. Fine. The ride was quiet. The city outside was waking up buses, hissing streetlights, fading the lake, glinting silver in the early light. Inside the car, the air felt too small for all the things they weren't saying. At one point, he asked softly, "Do you need anything?" "Doctor said you should take it easy. I'll manage." "You always do," he murmured. When they pulled up to her building, she unbuckled her seatbelt without looking at him. "Thank you for the ride." He nodded. "Can I at least walk you up?" "No, Owen. This isn't—" But when she opened the door, her knees wobbled. He caught her elbow instinctively. The touch sent a rush of memory through both of them. The familiarity, the warmth, the danger of what it meant. "Easy," he said quietly. She steadied herself, stepped back. "I'm fine." "I know," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "That's what scares me." Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat everything else disappeared. The city, the noise, the pain. It was just them. The ghosts of who they were colliding with the people they'd become. Then she broke the gaze. "Goodbye, Owen." He didn't move. "For now," he said softly. She didn't answer, just turned and walked toward the door. But once inside, she leaned against it, eyes closed, breath shaking. Through the thin walls, she could still hear the low hum of his car engine outside, waiting longer than he should have before finally driving away. She pressed her hand to her stomach. The babies stirred again, as if sensing the storm brewing around them. "It's all right," she whispered into the quiet. "We're safe." But the truth was, she wasn't sure anymore. Because now that Owen knew, nothing would ever be simple again. And in the fragile stillness of that morning, Xialia realized the hardest part wasn't learning how to live without him. It was facing the possibility that he might still love her, and that somewhere deep down, she might still love him too. The wind that night sounded like it carried ghosts. It howled through the streets of Chicago, whipping against glass and steel, shaking the bare branches along South Shore Drive. Xialia couldn't sleep. The storm was louder than her heartbeat, louder than the thoughts that wouldn't stop turning in her head. Every flash of lightning illuminated the small apartment blueprints, sketchbooks, a half-finished cradle by the window. The babies had been restless all day, twisting and kicking as though they too could feel the tension brewing in the air. She whispered to them, rubbing gentle circles over the curve of her stomach. "It's just thunder," she murmured. "Just noise. We're okay." But deep down she wasn't sure. Since the day at the hospital, Owen had kept his distance. He'd called twice each time, awkward, restrained, asking if she needed groceries, if the doctor had said anything new. His tone carried that careful balance of guilt and longing, as though afraid one wrong word might shatter the fragile peace between them. She'd thanked him both times politely and hung up before her voice could betray her. Now, weeks later, she sat by the window with a blanket around her shoulders, sketching in the dim light. Not buildings this time. Faces. 2 small round ones drawn in soft pencil strokes. She smiled faintly at the symmetry of them. A crack of thunder startled her hand, leaving a dark streak across the paper. She sighed and put the pencil down. Outside, the rain was falling sideways. Chicago was drowning in it. Streets slick with reflections, the lake whipped into chaos. Somewhere in the distance she heard the faint wail of sirens swallowed by wind. The power flickered once, then again. Then the lights went out. The apartment plunged into darkness. Her breath caught. She stood carefully, her balance off-center now, her body heavy with the weight of almost 8 months of pregnancy. She shuffled to the kitchen, feeling along the wall for the drawer where she kept candles. Her fingers brushed cold metal, found a matchbox, struck a flame. The room bloomed in amber light. A gust of wind rattled the window pane, and for a split second, she thought she heard something else, a knock. She froze. Another knock. Louder this time. Her first instinct was fear, but when she looked through the peephole, her breath hitched, for another reason entirely. Owen. Soaked through rain, running down his hair, his suit plastered to his frame. His hand lifted again, hesitant. She opened the door halfway. "What are you doing here?" He exhaled, water dripping from his coat. "Power's out across half the city. Roads are flooding near Lake Shore. I was driving home from a meeting downtown. Your street's nearly underwater. I thought I'd check on you." She blinked at him, disbelief mixing with something softer she didn't want to name. "You came all the way here in this." He shrugged, breathless. "You think a little rain scares me?" "Apparently not," she said, voice trembling somewhere between sarcasm and gratitude. "Can I come in?" A pause stretched between them, heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. Finally, she stepped aside. "Just until it settles down." He nodded, stepping in. The scent of rain and cold air followed him. He looked around, the candles, the unfinished cradle, the faint pencil sketches scattered across her desk. His gaze lingered on one, the twin faces. He didn't comment. He didn't have to. She lit another candle and set it on the coffee table. The flickering light caught his face, highlighting the exhaustion under his eyes, the shadow of something almost human beneath all that controlled perfection. "Nice place," he said quietly. "It's small," she replied. "It's home." She hesitated. "Yeah, it is." The thunder cracked again, closer now. The windows rattled. He crossed his arms, glancing toward them. "The city's saying it's one of the worst spring storms in years. Roads are closing fast. You should have stayed somewhere safe," she said. He looked at her, a faint ironic smile tugging at his lips. "I'm exactly where I should be." Her heart stumbled at that, but she ignored it, moving toward the kitchen. "You want tea? I can heat water on the gas stove." "Sure," he said softly. As she lit the burner, he stood in the doorway watching her. "You shouldn't be alone through this, Xialia." "I've been alone for months," she replied without turning. "Storms don't change that." He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "I know, and I hate it." The flame flickered, throwing shadows across the room. For a long moment, the only sound was the hiss of water starting to boil. She poured tea into 2 chipped mugs, carried them to the couch. When he took one, his fingers brushed hers, light, accidental, but electric. She pulled back. "Thanks," he said. They sat in silence, watching candlelight dance across the walls. Finally, he said, "I never meant for things to end like they did." She let out a small, bitter laugh. "That's the problem with people who break things. They never mean to." He flinched. "You're right. I was selfish. I thought ambition could fill every space where love used to live. Turns out it can't. It just echoes." She studied him, trying to find the man she used to know, the one who'd once stayed up all night, helping her assemble furniture in their first apartment, who'd made pancakes at 3 a.m. just because she couldn't sleep. Somewhere along the line, he'd buried that version of himself under boardrooms and headlines. But sitting there, rain soaking through his collar, he looked like that man again. "I don't know what you expect me to say," she whispered. "Nothing," he said. "I just need you to know I'm sorry." Something in his tone, raw, unpracticed, cut through her defenses. She wanted to stay angry. Anger was safe. Anger didn't make your voice tremble or your heart ache. But the truth was, she'd missed him. Every day. Even when she hated herself for it. The storm roared outside, as if daring her to admit it. A sudden pain gripped her abdomen. Sharp. unforgiving. She gasped, clutching the arm of the couch. Xialia Owen was at her side instantly. "What's wrong?" She tried to breathe, but another wave hit deeper this time. "It's just a cramp. I'm fine." He looked unconvinced. "You're not fine. You're pale as hell." The contraction eased, leaving her shaky. "It's early," she said quietly. "Too early." Owen's jaw tightened. "We're going to the hospital. The roads, I don't care." She shook her head, breath uneven. "It might pass. Dr. Reeves said stress can." Her words cut off with a cry. The pain came again stronger, ripping through her in waves. Owen's voice was steady, but his hands trembled as he grabbed her coat, wrapped it around her shoulders. "We're leaving. Now." Rain lashed against the windows. The power flickered again, candles bending in the wind. He half carried her to the door, shielding her from the downpour with his jacket. The storm swallowed them whole. Water splashed around their feet as they reached the car. Owen helped her inside, slammed the door, and started the engine. The wipers struggled against the torrent. "Stay with me," he said, glancing at her pale face. "Breathe, baby. Just breathe." She laughed weakly between gasps. "Don't call me that. Old habits die hard." The car lurched forward, tires slicing through waterlogged streets. Lightning flashed, revealing empty intersections and flooded curbs. The city had turned into a maze of reflection and fear. She pressed a hand to her stomach, whispering to the twins, voice trembling. "Hold on, my loves. Please, hold on." Owen reached over, grabbing her hand. "They will. You will. I've got you." His grip was firm, desperate, the same way he'd once held her hand at their wedding, both trembling for different reasons. The hospital lights appeared ahead like a beacon through the storm. Relief nearly undid her. As he screeched into the emergency bay, nurses rushed forward, shouting directions. Owen lifted her from the seat, refusing to let anyone else carry her. "Sir, we've got her." "No," he said, voice breaking. "I've got her." He laid her on the gurney, rainwater dripping from his hair onto her cheek. She smiled, faintly dizzy with pain and adrenaline. "You're soaked. I don't care." Her vision blurred as the nurses wheeled her toward the delivery room. Owen followed until a doctor stopped him at the door. "Sir, you can't go in." He froze, helpless. The door swung shut, locking him out. Through the glass, he saw her hand lift weakly, reaching toward him. He pressed his palm against it, separated by a wall and everything they'd broken. And as thunder cracked over the city, Owen whispered to the storm, to the woman he'd almost lost twice, "Don't take her from me again." Behind the door, the machines beeped faster. Voices shouted, a flash of movement, nurses, running lights flickering. Then silence. For one unbearable moment, the world stopped. Owen stood in the hallway, drenched, shaking his breath, fogging against the glass. Somewhere inside that room, the two people he loved most hovered between life and the void, and for the first time in his life, no amount of power or money could save them. He bowed his head. The thunder rolled again, and the city wept with him. The storm hadn't stopped. It pounded against the hospital windows, like a living thing, wild, merciless, desperate. The emergency ward was a blur of motion and noise, the squeal of gurney wheels, the echo of shouted orders, the sterile smell of rain-soaked coats and antiseptic. Owen stood in the hallway, drenched, his breath shallow, his heart hammering so loud he could barely hear the nurses calling codes. He'd been locked out of the delivery room for 15 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Every second stretched thin, vibrating with fear. When the doors finally burst open, Dr. Reeves stepped out, face grim. Owen lunged forward. "What's happening? Is she—" Her blood pressure dropped dangerously low, the doctor said quickly. We managed to stabilize the babies, but she's losing more blood than we can replace. The world narrowed into a single, unbearable truth. Tell me what you need, Owen said hoarsely. We need a donor. AB negative. It's rare. The supply we have isn't enough to sustain her through the next hour. Owen didn't hesitate. Take mine. Reeves blinked. You know your type? I know everything about her, Owen said quietly. We were married. We matched. Then we still do now. The doctor hesitated only a second before nodding. Come with me. They moved fast through white corridors that smelled like bleach and fear. A nurse pulled him into a small room, rolled up his sleeve, and tied a band around his arm. His skin was cold, his veins trembling under the pressure of adrenaline. Are you sure you're okay, sir? She asked, disinfecting the crook of his elbow. He laughed weakly. No, but she will be. The needle pierced skin. Blood began to flow, dark, rich, unstoppable. The nurse marked the bag, whispered something about volume and timing, but Owen wasn't listening. All he could think of was the first time he'd ever seen her bleed. It was years ago. She'd cut her palm on broken glass while unpacking boxes in their first apartment. He'd rushed to her side, frantic, holding her hand under the sink, muttering apologies like it was his fault. The world had sharp edges. She'd laughed, then told him, Relax, it's just a cut. You can't protect me from everything. But now he would give anything to protect her from this. As his blood filled the bag, he looked out the window. The storm was still raging, lightning carving the sky into violent veins of light. He wondered if she could feel it, that connection, that silent tether between them. The nurse removed the needle, pressed a gauze pad against his arm. We'll take this right in, she said gently. Go, he whispered. Please go. When the door closed, he sank into the chair, head in his hands. His body was trembling, drained, but his mind burned with clarity. Every word he'd ever said to her, replayed in cruel precision, the harsh tone in that boardroom fight, the cold silence of the courtroom, the look on her face when she signed her name and walked away. He'd thought he could bury regret under success, that work could drown memory. But memory, it turned out, could swim. He stood ignoring the dizziness that threatened to pull him down and walked back toward the maternity ward. The hallway felt endless. The light above the operating room door was still red. In progress. He pressed his palm against the glass window, in the door, eyes fixed on her still form inside. She looked impossibly fragile under the harsh lights, skin pale hair, damp with sweat, lips parted as if caught between breaths. Tubes, monitors, wires, machines doing the work her body couldn't. Dr. Reeves barked orders. Nurses moved like dancers in a frantic, wordless rhythm. The transfusion had begun. His blood, his life was finding its way into hers. Owen swallowed hard, resting his forehead against the cool glass. Don't go, he whispered. Not like this. Not when I finally remember what matters. He stayed like that until the red light went dark. The door opened, and Reeves emerged again. This time his expression was different, tired, but not grim. She's stable, he said. Owen's knees nearly gave out. And the babies. They're small but strong. 2 boys. You should be proud. He nodded, eyes burning. Can I see her? The doctor hesitated, then gave a small smile. Just for a minute. Inside the room was dim and quiet. The monitors beeped, steadily rhythmic and alive. Xialia lay still, a faint blush of color returning to her cheeks. Her lips moved faintly, whispering something he couldn't hear. He moved closer, careful not to disturb the tubes or wires, and took her hand in his. It was warm again. Real. Hey, he murmured. It's me. Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't wake. He brushed a damp curl from her forehead, voice breaking. You scared the life out of me. The monitors continued their steady pulse, and he found himself matching his breath to the rhythm, as if his body was trying to sync with hers again. He sat beside her until dawn. The storm finally broke the rain, softening into a whisper. When morning came, pale light filtered through the blinds, painting soft lines across her face. She stirred, eyelashes fluttering. Owen. Her voice was barely audible. He leaned forward instantly. I'm here. Her brow furrowed, confused. The babies. They're safe, he said quickly. They're perfect. Her eyes filled with tears, relief washing over her like sunlight after too long in the dark. I know, he said, his own voice shaking. But you're all right. You're all right now. Silence hung between them, fragile but full of meaning. She glanced at the bandage on his arm. You gave blood. Of course I did. You didn't have to. He smiled faintly. You forget who you're talking to. I never did know how to walk away from a challenge. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. This isn't about pride, Owen. I know, he said quietly. It's about us. Her gaze drifted to the window, where sunlight touched the rain-slick streets below. There hasn't been an us for a long time. He took a breath, steadying himself. Then maybe this is where it starts again. She turned her head, studying him. His face was unshaven, his eyes red, his voice stripped of every layer of arrogance she used to hate. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said softly. I'm not asking for that, he replied. I just want to be here. For you, for them. Her fingers flexed weakly in his hand. They're yours, she said, her voice breaking on the words. He closed his eyes, tears slipping free. I know. He leaned down, pressed a trembling kiss to her knuckles. And I swear, I'll never leave again. For the first time in a long time, she didn't pull away. A few hours later, he stood in the nursery, looking through the glass at the two tiny figures swaddled in identical blankets. Their chests rose and fell in perfect rhythm, their faces peaceful. The nurse beside him smiled. They're strong boys. They made it through the worst night of the year. Owen nodded, emotion catching in his throat. So did she. He pressed his palm against the glass the same way he had when he thought he'd lost them, and whispered, You're not alone anymore. Behind him, the nurse adjusted her clipboard. Do you have names yet? He hesitated. She wanted to choose. But I think she'd like Miles. And Noah. The nurse smiled. Beautiful names. He watched the babies for a long time, every breath they took a silent redemption. When he finally returned to Xialia's room, she was awake again, propped against her pillows, eyes heavy but clear. Did you see them? She asked. He smiled. Yeah. They're already giving the nurses hell. She laughed softly, a sound he hadn't realized he'd missed until that moment. Then they take after you. Maybe, he said. But they've got your heart. Her smile faded slightly, eyes searching his. You can't fix this with poetry, Owen. I'm not trying to, he said. I just don't know how else to tell you. I still love you. The words landed between them, raw and true. She looked away, blinking hard. Love isn't enough, not after everything we've done to each other. I know, he said quietly, but maybe it's a place to start. She didn't answer, just stared at the rain outside, at the city, slowly waking after the storm. After a long moment, she whispered, You bled for me. He smiled faintly. Guess I finally learned how to give something that wasn't money. Her eyes filled again, but she said nothing. The machines hummed softly. The storm clouds thinned, and for the first time in years, the world around them felt still. 2 heartbeats echoed down the hallway from the nursery. 2 lives born from chaos, bound by love, by blood, by the second chance neither of them had expected. And as sunlight broke through the clouds over Chicago, Owen sat beside her bed, holding her hand, knowing that for the first time since he'd lost her, he didn't want to let go. The week after the twins were born felt like living between 2 worlds, one made of light, the other of shadows. The maternity floor of Northwestern Memorial smelled of disinfectant and new beginnings. Every corridor hummed with life, footsteps, laughter, the faint cry of newborns echoing like fragile proof that hope still existed. For Xialia, it all felt unreal. She would wake in the middle of the night, the sound of monitors pulsing beside her, and wonder if she'd dreamed the whole thing. But then she'd hear the faintest coo from the nursery, soft and human, and hers, and the truth would hit her like a wave. They were real. They'd survived, and so had she. But survival didn't mean peace. She spent hours staring at the small plastic bracelets around the baby's wrists. Miles Martin. Noah Martin. The names Owen had chosen while she slept through sedation and blood loss. She hadn't objected, but every time she looked at them, her chest tightened. The names fit, but the surname, his name, felt heavy. He visited every day, quietly, carefully, bringing flowers she never asked for, takeout. She never ate, awkward silences she didn't know how to fill. He'd sit in the chair by the window watching her feed the twins, sometimes smiling, sometimes saying nothing at all. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. She didn't know how to exist around him anymore. Not as enemies, not as lovers, not as strangers. There was a time when she'd known every version of him, the man who'd made her laugh until she cried, the one who could read her thoughts from across a crowded room. But this new Owen, the one who spoke softly, who looked at her like she might vanish again. She didn't know what to do with him. One afternoon, the nurse wheeled her outside to the small garden terrace reserved for recovery patients. The city stretched out before her, all glass and steel glittering under a cautious sun. Owen followed, hands in his pockets, the wind catching his hair. "You shouldn't be standing so long," he said gently. "I'm fine," she replied, eyes fixed on the skyline. "It feels good to breathe air that isn't recycled." He smiled faintly. Fair enough. For a few moments neither spoke. The sound of distant traffic filled the space between them. Finally she said, "I heard what you did. The transfusion." He looked away, pretending to study the garden's empty flower beds. Anyone would have done the same. "No," she said quietly. "Not anyone." The breeze lifted her hair, and for the first time since the storm, he saw color in her cheeks again. "I don't know how to thank you," she added. "You don't have to," he said. "Just get better." She turned to face him fully, her voice softer now. "I am getting better, but I don't know what that means anymore. Not after all of this." Owen's throat tightened. "It means you're still here. And that's everything." Her eyes met his, dark and unreadable. "Is it? Or is this just you trying to rewrite the ending?" The words landed between them like glass breaking. He took a step closer. "Maybe I am. Maybe I don't want the last thing between us to be a courtroom." Her voice trembled. "You don't get to choose when it's convenient to care." "I know." He hesitated, searching her face. "But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving." The conviction in his tone made something inside her falter. He sounded like the man she'd fallen for years ago, the one who'd once stood outside her apartment, in the rain, holding flowers, and saying he'd wait all night just to apologize. She turned away before he could see her tears. You always say that, Owen. Until something more important comes along. There's nothing more important than you, he said. The words came out raw, almost desperate. She closed her eyes, whispering, Don't say that unless you mean it. I do. But she didn't answer. She couldn't. The babies stirred softly in the nearby bassinets, reminding them both of how fragile this moment was. Later that night, after the nurses had dimmed the lights, Owen found himself back in the hospital lobby, sitting alone on one of the benches near the entrance. The building was quiet now, the storm outside replaced by a soft drizzle that misted against the glass doors. He should have gone home. He hadn't slept in 3 days, hadn't eaten properly in 2. But he couldn't leave. Not when every part of him still hummed with the fear of losing her. He took out his phone. The home screen still showed a picture of him at a charity gala, arm around a faceless investor smile practiced. He scrolled through his contacts until he reached one name he hadn't dialed in years: Michael Carter. Michael had been his business partner, his closest friend, the man who'd told him to sign the divorce papers, who'd said love was a liability, that emotions were bad for the brand. He pressed the call button. Michael answered on the second ring. Owen, Jesus, it's 3 a.m. What's wrong? Owen's voice was flat. You remember what you told me about distractions, about cutting ties? Michael groaned. Oh, don't start that philosophical crap again. You sound like a man who hasn't had a drink in too long. I was wrong, Owen said quietly. You were wrong. About everything. There was silence on the other end, then a slow sigh. This about her. It's always been about her. Michael chuckled without humor. You're not thinking straight. You can't just, I already did, Owen said, cutting him off. She almost died. And I realized something. I'd trade every deal I've ever made just to hear her breathe. The line went quiet again. Then unexpectedly Michael said, Then you finally sound human, my friend. Owen hung up. He leaned back on the bench, closing his eyes, the rain outside painting faint streaks of silver across the lobby floor. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about stock prices or meetings or quarterly targets. He was thinking about tiny hands and the sound of her voice and the way life had a cruel habit of reminding him what mattered only after it had almost taken it away. By morning, Xialia was discharged. She moved slower than she liked, the weight of exhaustion still clinging to her, but she refused a wheelchair. Owen stayed close, hovering like a shadow, carrying bags and signing papers she barely glanced at. When they reached the hospital entrance, the city was waking early. Commuters honking taxis, the sky tinted pale gold. He opened the car door for her, but she hesitated. Where are you taking us? She asked. Home, he said simply. She frowned. You mean my home? He hesitated, then said quietly, It doesn't have to be just yours. Her jaw tightened. You don't get to erase what happened with the sentence. I'm not trying to erase anything he said. The babies stirred softly in their car seats, and he stopped, lowering his voice. You shouldn't have to do this alone. Not anymore. She looked at him for a long time, searching for the old arrogance, the distance, the walls. But they weren't there. Just fatigue, regret, sincerity that scared her more than the storm ever had. Finally, she nodded. Drive. The word came out flat, but he understood what it meant. A truce. As they drove through the city, sunlight broke through the clouds, glinting off wet pavement. The skyline rose behind them, majestic and indifferent. In the back seat, the twins, slept faces turned toward each other, tiny chests rising in unison. Owen glanced in the rearview mirror, his voice low. You know they look just like you. She smiled faintly. You think so? Yeah. Same stubborn expression. She turned her face toward the window, hiding a laugh. It was small, fleeting, but real. The car moved through the morning traffic, weaving past the lake, where their reflections shimmered in passing puddles. And for the first time in what felt like forever, silence between them didn't feel like punishment. It felt like possibility. When he pulled up in front of her building, she looked at him, her expression unreadable. Thank you, she said. He nodded. For the ride. For not giving up. He smiled faintly. I'm still learning how not to. She opened the door, stepped out, then turned back for a moment. The sunlight caught her hair, haloed her in gold. Maybe, she said softly, you can come by tomorrow, if you want. He blinked. I want. She nodded once, then disappeared inside. Owen sat in the car for a long time after that, the city waking around him. The world slowly stitching itself back together. He closed his eyes, leaned his head back, and for the first time in years, let himself feel hope. Upstairs in a small apartment filled with the sound of new life, Xialia stood by the window holding one of the twins, watching the clouds drift over the lake. The storm had passed, but part of her knew another kind was coming. Only this time, she wasn't sure she wanted to stop it. Chicago in late spring carried that rare kind of beauty that hurt to look at, streets washed clean by rain, air sharp with lilac and gasoline lake wind, cool enough to make the city feel alive again. For most people, it was the season of beginnings. For Xialia, it felt like standing on the edge of something she couldn't quite name, part fear, part forgiveness, part love, refusing to die quietly. 2 weeks had passed since she'd brought the twins home. The apartment was smaller now, filled with bottles, blankets, and the constant rhythm of 2 new heartbeats. Miles and Noah were growing stronger every day. Tiny fists, hungry cries, the faint scent of baby powder lingering in every corner. But peace came in fleeting moments. Between the midnight feedings and the constant exhaustion, there were long silences filled with memories she didn't invite. Owen's voice, Owen's hands, the way his eyes had looked at her in that hospital room, like a man standing at the edge of redemption. He had kept his word. He showed up every day, quietly, consistently. He didn't try to force his way back into her life. He simply showed up. Groceries in one hand, baby formula in the other, a hesitant smile that didn't reach his eyes. Just making sure you're eating, he'd say. Or, the car seat in the back wasn't safe enough. I replaced it. At first, she thought it was guilt. But guilt fades. This didn't. It was Thursday afternoon when he arrived again, his tie loose, his sleeves rolled up, hair damp from the drizzle outside. She was in the kitchen, rocking Noah in one arm, while balancing a bottle in the other. Hey, he said softly from the doorway. You look tired. She gave him a look that was half sarcasm, half truth. That's motherhood for you. Need help? I've got it. He hesitated, watching her gently shift the baby to her shoulder. The domesticity of it hit him hard, the way she looked in the soft light, her movements automatic, tender, strong. He'd spent years surrounded by boardrooms and marble offices, but this was what real power looked like. Still, he said, after a beat, let me at least make you coffee. She laughed quietly. You make coffee. The man who once burned water. He grinned, stepping forward. I've evolved. Watch me impress you. She handed him a mug, skeptical. Don't ruin my machine. As he fumbled with the coffee maker, she watched him from across the kitchen. It was strange how normal he looked, standing there, sleeves rolled up, pretending like the world hadn't fallen apart around them. He glanced over his shoulder. What? Nothing. You're staring. I'm watching to make sure you don't break anything. He smirked. So, you are staring. She rolled her eyes, but a smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Some things never change. No, he said quietly, pouring the coffee into a mug. Some things shouldn't. The words lingered in the air, longer than they should have. He brought her the mug, his fingers brushing hers for half a second. The warmth that shot through her hand had nothing to do with the coffee. She pulled away too quickly. Thank you, she said, sitting down at the small kitchen table. He leaned against the counter, studying her. You're doing incredible. You know that? She looked up, caught off guard. What with them? With all of this? I don't think I've ever seen anyone handle chaos with this much grace. She let out a dry laugh. Grace. You haven't seen me at 3 a.m. when both start screaming. I'd like to, he said before realizing how it sounded. I mean, not the screaming part, just... She raised an eyebrow, and he stopped, rubbing the back of his neck. You know what I mean. Yeah, she murmured, hiding a small smile behind the rim of her cup. For a moment it felt easy, familiar, like muscle memory. But the quiet that followed wasn't empty. It pulsed with something unspoken. The truth that there were still wounds between them too deep to pretend away. Finally, she said softly, I don't know what this is, Owen. He looked up. What do you mean, this? You being here, every day. Helping, staying. It feels like you're trying to rebuild something that she stopped searching for the right word, that maybe isn't meant to be rebuilt. He crossed the room, slow, cautious, like approaching a wild animal that might bolt. I'm not trying to rebuild the old us. That's gone. I know that. I just want to be here for what comes next. Her heart gave a painful twist. You say that now. But what happens when it's not convenient? When it gets messy again? When the board calls or the market crashes, and suddenly I'm not your priority? He flinched, the truth of it cutting clean. Then I'll prove to you that I've learned, that you are the priority. Her eyes shone with something fragile. Words are easy, Owen. I know, he said quietly. That's why I stopped talking and started showing up. The sincerity in his voice disarmed her. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But she'd believed him before. She turned away her hand, tracing slow circles on Noah's back. You broke me once, she said softly, and I had to put myself back together without you. That changes a person. His voice dropped. I don't want to break anything anymore. I just want to build. The word build hit her harder than it should have. Before she could respond, Miles stirred from the crib, his soft cry filling the room. She exhaled relief and tension tangled together. He's up. Owen smiled faintly. I've got him. You sure? He nodded, moving to the crib with surprising ease. He lifted the baby gently, his large hands supporting the tiny body with reverence. Miles blinked up at him, yawning, and Owen chuckled quietly. Hey there, little man, he murmured. You've got your mom's stubbornness already, don't you? Watching him like that, careful, tender, utterly unguarded, did something to her. It cracked open a memory. She'd tried to seal shut Owen in their old apartment, holding her niece for the first time, saying with a shy grin, I think I could be good at this someday. Back then, she'd believed him. Now, looking at him with their son in his arms, she wondered if maybe he'd finally become that man. He turned to her, smiling. He's so light. How is it possible? Someone so small can take over your entire world. Welcome to parenthood, she said softly. He looked at her for a long time. I missed too much already. I won't miss any more. Her throat tightened. Don't promise what you can't keep. I'm not promising. he said. I'm deciding. Something in his tone, steady, unshaken, made her chest ache. She wanted to look away, to hide from how much she still cared, but his eyes held her there, in that fragile, impossible space between forgiveness and fear. Then, as if the universe couldn't stand the tension, a small sound broke between them, a hiccup, then a laugh. Miles giggled, an unexpected musical sound that filled the room. Owen froze, eyes wide. Did he just... Yeah, she said, smiling through sudden tears. He laughed. The sound was so pure, so perfect, that it melted everything else away. For a few seconds, the world didn't exist beyond that tiny joy. Owen met her eyes, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that life somehow was giving them another chance. Not as husband and wife, not yet, but as two people learning how to exist in the same light again. He placed Miles gently back in the crib, then turned to leave. I'll come by tomorrow. You need rest. She hesitated. Owen. He stopped in the doorway. Yeah. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Thank you. For being here. For not running. He smiled softly. I've done enough running for a lifetime. And with that, he stepped into the hallway, the door closing quietly behind him. Inside, the apartment fell into stillness again. Xialia sank onto the couch, eyes drifting toward the crib, where the twins slept, their tiny chests rising in unison. The light from the window touched their faces and spilled across the floor, like a quiet blessing. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. Not completely. Outside, the city kept breathing. The rain had stopped. The air smelled like something new. And somewhere in that fragile calm, Xialia realized that maybe love wasn't about starting over. Maybe it was about staying long enough to learn how to begin differently. The weeks passed quietly, like the city was learning to breathe again after a long storm. Chicago's skyline shimmered in the early summer haze, the lake calm, for once gulls floating lazily on its mirrored surface. Inside the small apartment on South Shore Drive, life had begun to find rhythm again, feeding, sleeping, crying, laughing. The sound of the twins had become the pulse of the place, unpredictable, yet steady like music only Xialia and Owen could understand. Owen kept coming back. Every morning, every evening. Sometimes with groceries, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with nothing but silence, and the look of a man trying to repair something he wasn't sure could be repaired. He didn't overstep. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just showed up. And that somehow made it harder for her, because each day he stayed, the wall she'd built inside her began to crack. It started one afternoon when she caught him sitting on the floor beside the crib, reading softly from a book. His voice was low, calm, almost reverent. The babies had already fallen asleep, but he kept reading anyway, something about building bridges, about the weight they carried, and the beauty of holding two sides together. When she asked what it was, he said it was a story his mother used to read to him. She'd watched him quietly then, the sunlight tracing the lines of his face, and thought, not for the first time, that maybe he wasn't the same man who'd walked out years ago. Maybe life had finally taught him how to stay. Still, there were days when fear sat heavy on her chest. Days when she'd look at him and remember the coldness in his voice the day he told her love made him weak. Those words lived under her skin, sharp and buried deep. It was a Tuesday evening when the past came rushing back. The air was thick with the smell of rain. She was in the kitchen sterilizing bottles when her phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Ms. Nelson, a voice said briskly. This is Laura from Martin Holdings, Mr. Martin's assistant. I'm calling to confirm tomorrow's press event at the Four Seasons. He'll need you and the twins there by 10. She froze. Excuse me. Oh, hasn't he told you? It's a media piece about his philanthropy work, focusing on family. He said his wife and children. I'm not his wife. She cut in, her voice low, steady, dangerous. There was a pause. Then awkwardly, I see. I'll let him know. She ended the call and stood there, the bottle brush dripping soap and water into the sink. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. He'd done so well, weeks of quiet, of respect. And then this. The old arrogance, the control. When the door opened 15 minutes later, she didn't look up. Hey, he said softly, setting a bag of groceries down. You okay? You look pale. She didn't answer. He frowned, stepping closer. Xialia. Why didn't you tell me? She asked quietly. He blinked. Tell you what? The press event. Your assistant called. Apparently you thought parading your ex-wife and newborns in front of cameras would be a great PR move. His face changed. The color drained from it. That's not what this is. No, she snapped, turning to face him. Because that's exactly what it sounds like. He took a step closer, his voice calm but tense. It was supposed to be a charity segment about supporting maternal health programs. I wanted to what? She interrupted. Show the world you care. Redeem your image by using us. He closed his eyes, exhaling. No, that's not it. Then what is it? Owen. Her voice cracked on his name. Because you don't get to have it both ways. You don't get to leave me when it's inconvenient, and then suddenly remember I exist when it makes you look good. He opened his mouth, but she kept going, years of swallowed pain spilling out, all at once. You don't understand what it's like to be on the other side of your name. Every headline, every photo, every whisper, they all follow me. They followed me when you left. They followed me through my pregnancy. They turned me into a rumor. He stepped closer, voice low, shaking. I didn't mean for any of that to happen, but it did. She said, eyes glistening. And now you want me to smile for cameras like nothing ever broke. The room went quiet, except for the faint sound of the babies stirring in the other room. Rain began to hit the windows harder, as if the sky had decided to echo her voice. He moved closer slowly, like approaching a fragile truth. You're right, he said finally. I didn't tell you because I was scared you'd say no, and I didn't want to lose whatever small place I have left in your life. But I swear, Xialia, I wasn't trying to use you. I just thought if people saw the real story, maybe it could mean something. The real story? She repeated, bitter laughter in her throat. You mean our story? The one you abandoned, he flinched, but didn't back away. The one I'm trying to make right. Her hands trembled on the edge of the counter. She wanted to scream, to cry, to push him out the door. But when she looked at him, really looked, what she saw wasn't arrogance. It was desperation, regret, the raw ache of a man who'd spent too long pretending to be untouchable. She exhaled shakily. You can't fix everything with good intentions. I know, he said quietly, but I can try to fix this. Something inside her cracked again, but this time it didn't hurt. It just felt tired. She turned away, wiping her hands on a towel. Go home, Owen. I need time. He hesitated. I'll cancel the event. Do what you want, she murmured. Just leave me out of it. He stood there for a moment, rainwater dripping from his coat eyes, searching hers for something she wasn't ready to give. Then he nodded once and left. When the door clicked shut, she sank into a chair, pressing her face into her hands. For a long time she stayed like that, listening to the sound of the storm, wondering if love could really survive everything they'd done to it. He didn't come by the next day, or the day after that. By the third morning, the silence hurt more than the anger had. The apartment felt too still, the twins' laughter echoing through rooms that suddenly felt too big. She told herself she needed space, but when she saw his name on the news, Owen Martin donates $10 million to Women's Health Initiative, declines to attend press event. Something inside her shifted. He'd listened. That night, when the babies were finally asleep, she stepped onto the balcony. The city lights stretched out before her like a sea of tiny stars. She stood there a long time, the wind in her hair, and whispered into the open air, "What are you doing to me, Owen?" The next morning, she found a letter slipped under her door. No envelope, just her name in his handwriting. She sat on the couch, heart pounding, and unfolded it. "I didn't want to call. I figured I've said enough wrong things already. But I need you to know something. That night in the hospital when they said you might not make it, I realized there isn't a version of success that means anything if I can't share it with you. You don't owe me forgiveness. You don't owe me anything. But I'll keep showing up, even if it's just as the man who holds the door carries the groceries and waits quietly in the hallway. If someday you can look at me without pain, that will be enough. Owen." She didn't realize she was crying until the ink began to blur. She pressed the paper to her chest, then looked toward the twins, sleeping peacefully beside her. "He's still trying," she whispered, "and maybe that counts for something." For the first time in years, the word maybe didn't feel like uncertainty. It felt like hope, the kind that doesn't promise you a perfect ending, just a chance to keep writing. Summer had settled over Chicago like a sigh of relief. The storms had passed, the air warm but gentle, and the city, so often chaotic, seemed to have slowed its heartbeat just enough for people to breathe again. The lake shimmered under morning light, stretching endlessly toward the horizon, and the streets were dotted with the hum of ordinary lives, continuing. Inside the apartment on South Shore Drive, Xialia stood barefoot near the window, her hair loose, sunlight kissing her shoulders. Miles and Noah slept in their twin bassinets, the soft rhythm of their breathing filling the space between her and the world outside. She held Owen's letter in her hand, the edges creased from how many times she'd unfolded it. It had been a week since he'd sent it, a week since he'd stopped coming by. A week of silence that somehow spoke louder than all his apologies combined. At first, she'd told herself that this was what she wanted: peace, solitude, no more confusion. But solitude, she realized, wasn't peace. It was emptiness wearing a mask. She looked out over the lake, the morning light glinting off the surface, and whispered into the quiet, "You kept your promise. You stayed away." The words didn't sound like victory. They sounded like loss. There was a soft knock at the door. She froze, her breath catching. It wasn't the knock of a delivery man or a neighbor. It was slower, hesitant, like someone asking permission to be forgiven. She opened the door. Owen stood there, dressed simply in a dark shirt and jeans, no tie, no armor. His eyes were tired, but warm, his smile tentative. He held no flowers. This time, no gifts, just himself. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey, can I come in?" She hesitated for a heartbeat, then stepped aside. "You always do." He smiled faintly at that, stepping in. The familiar scent of her apartment, lavender baby lotion. Something sweet and real washed over him. He glanced at the bassinets, his eyes softening. "They're getting bigger. They eat like they're training for a marathon," she said. He laughed quietly. "They take after you then, always determined." She folded her arms, leaning against the counter. "So, why are you here, Owen?" He met her eyes, and there was no hesitation this time. "To tell you something I should have said a long time ago." She waited silent. He took a slow breath. I used to think love was supposed to look like control, like strategy, like something you managed, not something you lived in. But then I lost you, and I realized I didn't know a damn thing about love. His voice trembled slightly, but he didn't stop. Love isn't power. It's surrender. It's showing up even when you don't know what to say. It's staying when you've got nothing left to prove. And that's all I want to do now. Stay. Her throat tightened. She wanted to look away to shield herself from the sincerity in his voice. But something about him, this stripped-down version of Owen, made it impossible. You've changed, she said quietly. I had to, he murmured. The man you married wasn't worthy of you. I'm trying to be the one who is. She looked down at the letter still in her hand. You said you'd wait quietly in the hallway. I did. And now? He smiled faintly. Now I'm asking if I can come home. The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of something new. Not a fairy tale, not perfection, just possibility. She looked at him for a long time, at the man who'd once broken her heart, bled for her learned humility the hard way. And for the first time since everything fell apart, she didn't see the man who left. She saw the one who came back. Home isn't what it used to be, she said softly. He nodded. Good. Maybe this time we build it right. Her laugh was small, shaky. You and your building metaphors. They're kind of my thing, he said, stepping closer. Can I hold them? She nodded. He knelt beside the bassinets, lifting Miles first, cradling him carefully against his chest. The baby stirred but didn't cry. Small fingers curling in the fabric of his shirt. Owen smiled down at him, eyes glistening. Hey, little man, it's your dad. Xialia watched him, her heart bending under the weight of 1,000 memories. His first laugh, their first kiss the night they signed those papers in court. So much had been lost between those moments. But maybe, just maybe, not everything. He looked up at her, voice trembling. He has your eyes. Lucky for him, she said softly. He chuckled. You know, I used to think I was the strong one in this relationship. Turns out, it was you all along. She met his gaze, and for a moment, it was like no time had passed. Just two people standing in the quiet aftermath of everything they'd survived. The twins began to stir, their small sounds filling the air. She crossed the room, reaching to take Noah in her arms. Their hands brushed, warm, steady, certain. I don't know where we go from here, she said honestly. Then let's figure it out, he replied. Together. There was no grand declaration, no cinematic music swelling beneath their words. Just truth, simple and raw and enough. She nodded slowly. Okay. He blinked, as if afraid to believe it. Okay, okay, she repeated, her lips curving into a smile that reached her eyes this time. He set Miles back into his crib, turned toward her, and hesitated. Then gently he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was small, but it felt monumental. You still take my breath away, he whispered. She laughed softly. You're out of practice. Then maybe I need the chance to get better. She didn't pull away when he leaned in. Their lips met, not desperate, not hungry, but with the kind of tenderness that only comes after loss. It wasn't about starting over. It was about beginning again. When they finally parted, the city outside was bathed in gold. Later that evening, they took the twins for a walk along the lake. The path was lined with wildflowers, and the smell of rain lingering in the air. Owen pushed the stroller while Xialia walked beside him, their shoulders brushing now and then. He glanced at her, a smile ghosting his lips. Do you think they'll remember this? She shook her head, smiling. Probably not. But we will. The wind caught her hair, the sky painted in pink and lavender hues. She looked peaceful, something he hadn't seen in her in years. He slipped his hand into hers. She didn't pull away. "Do you ever think," he said softly, "that maybe all the wrong turns were just leading us back here?" She smiled faintly. "That sounds like something you'd say in a board meeting." "Yeah," he said, squeezing her hand. "But this time it's true." They walked in silence after that, the kind that didn't need filling. The waves lapped softly against the shore, and somewhere nearby a street musician played an old love song on a saxophone. It wasn't perfect. Nothing was. But it was theirs. When they reached the pier, she turned to him. "You know, for a man who used to think love was a liability, you've turned out to be a hopeless romantic." He grinned. "I had the best teacher." The laughter that followed was quiet, easy, like exhaling after holding your breath too long. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she looked at him, eyes shimmering with something that felt like peace. "We lost each other once," she said. "Let's not do it again." He nodded, voice low. "Never again." And this time, she believed him. The twins stirred softly in their stroller, their tiny hands brushing against each other. The lake wind carried their small sounds away, mingling with the hum of the city, the heartbeat of two people who had finally learned how to stop running. Sometimes love doesn't return as fireworks or grand gestures. It comes back as quiet mornings, shared laughter, second chances. It asks you to stay, to forgive, to rebuild. If this story touched you, take a moment to breathe, to feel, and to remember love, no matter how broken, can still find its way home. Share this story. Leave a comment. Tell someone you believe in second chances, because somewhere, someone is still waiting for theirs.